KOIN Conversations. This is part 2 of this conversation with author and journalist Dana Haynes. My name is Travis Tyke, anchor here at KOIN 6 News and Portland's CW. I'm going to bring back Dana Haynes here for part 2 of our conversation. In part 1, Dana, we spoke extensively about your work as a novelist and the process of building these characters, taking them to the page, and hopefully to the big screen. That was really fun to talk about. I now want to switch gears as we continue this conversation over storytelling. You're a journalist, first and foremost, preceding your professional work as a novelist.
Absolutely.
So I want to talk about your life as a journalist for decades at several local papers. I do want to ask you about this life of constantly writing between your time as a journalist and a novelist and how these two worlds are really interwoven. But I'm going to start on a little bit of a pertinent subject right now. With where you stand right now, too, and how the industry stands, are conversations I want to get into, because after 10 years' time with the Portland Tribune and your most recent run with the Portland Tribune, where you've done several stints at, over the decades, you and several other journalists were recently laid off, which is tough news. And I'm sorry to hear that, of course. And I know we've offlined about that as well. But I want to use that as a jumping off point, because layoffs are a part of the industry these days. And, we do come from different angles in the journalism world. I've been in TV news my entire career, you in print. And, of course, print looks different than TV, not just how it's consumed, but in the life of a journalist, too. So I want to just get your thoughts with the layoffs and what do you think that this all means for the state of the journalism industry, and maybe local journalism as a whole? Kind of a loaded question.
Well, the Portland Tribune was one of 22 papers that stretched from Forest Grove to Gresham and Sandy and Estacada, as far away as Madras and Prineville. And we're a different beast in the Tribune because we're in a media-rich environment. If I sent my reporter, or if I as a writer went out to cover a story, you'd be there, and the Oregonian would be there, and radio would be there. And so we competed in a way that the Estacada paper doesn't do that. Nobody competes against them. If you're covering the Estacada school board meeting, you're the only reporter in the room, and you always will be. Same in Forest Grove and same in Madras. So they are stronger economically because they have a very specific ad base. If you run a garage in Sandy, you're more likely to advertise with the Sandy paper than you are at the Oregonian, because you can hit more Sandy residents. So my suburban papers were just actually physically doing better than the Tribune. The Tribune, I'm not 100% sure ever once was profitable. I think it's entirely possible that the company-wide kept the Tribune alive. So we did have very big layoffs in June. We lost 6 of 8 staff in the news side, and it was traumatic. I have a second career, and I have a wife who makes more money than I do and is doing really, really well. So I'm in better shape than some of my young, really, really talented folks who lost their jobs. I'm much more worried about them. But I think the Tribune just was in such a media-rich environment. We were never, ever, and it started in 2000, and never 100% caught the traction that it needed to break through.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So, I mean, when you look at the next steps here, so, and maybe this is more of a print-specific question, but what does the future hold? Not just for the Tribune, but I mean, this is the media industry, for lack of a better word, can be really saturated, right? There's a lot of noise, there's a lot of clutter, and it can be difficult. It can be difficult, and there's this demand for content, but you never want to sacrifice the quality. And I'm happy to be transparent about these processes here too. Like this doesn't have to be just one direction. But what is the future here of maybe local print journalism, in your opinion? And this doesn't have to be Portland specific, but it obviously can. Of course, the internet changed the game. I know that's a very basic take, but specifically to print, TV too, but with print, monetizing the digital world is a difficult task, and it's something that has been heavily debated and weighed for decades already. So with that said, what is the next step for local papers, and is our layoffs, or maybe it's just our reality that we're living in for journalists?
First thing to say, and I really want to be hopeful when I say this, is that in the last 4 or 5 years, I participated in the hiring of really great young storytellers who are passionate about journalism and passionate about telling stories. Hannah Siebold was the most recent pickup we had. She's in her mid-20s, U of O grad. Absolutely tremendous feature writer. And she would find stories. I've lived in Portland for many, many, many years. She would find assets and elements of Portland to write about that I'd never heard of. So I'm really, really excited about the young folks who really want to be journalists and really want to do it. Would I, at this point in my stage in my life, invest in newsprint or ink? Nah, probably not. It's not in my portfolio because I don't know how that mechanism is going to survive in the next 5, 10 years. I also should say that I don't understand the business end of journalism and never have. I've always been a newsroom dude. My job was to just slap downs against verbs. So I don't really know the business model much. I do think, and again, the pressures that national media have are different than the pressures that community newspapers have. People will scream and shout, fake news, fake news, fake news, but they won't do that if you're covering the Hillsborough City Council meeting or the Marion County Commission, because if you got it wrong once, everybody in the community would know you got it wrong once, and you got it wrong twice, you'd be fired. So we never had that strange, weird national pressure that the national media has. You go and cover something in Estacada or Gresham, you got to get it right, and everybody will know if you didn't. And if you got it right the first time and somebody else says, oh, it's fake news, all of the other folks in town will say, no, it's not. Chris Kaiser, the reporter, brilliant reporter for Gresham, he will get defended by the mayor or the city council if people scream fake news at him because they know, no, Chris got it right. He was in the meeting. So it's a little bit easier on the level of which I've worked than it is the national level. Now, will we always have newspapers made of ink? I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think that's going to go away at some point. Yeah. I really do. Our website, the Portland Tribune's website, was something we were real proud about. We were updating. We had like 9 news spots in them, and we would update them every day. We would swap them out, 9 news stories with my 2.5 full-time reporters that I had. That's going to be the future. Will people continue to be great storytellers and find great ways to tell stories, but with media that I can't imagine yet? Absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah, no question about it. KOIN Conversations. Streaming.
Yeah.
It's a different way of telling the story.
Totally.
So I'm not worried about storytellers, and I'm not worried about watchdogs. We'll have them. I just don't know the mechanism by which they will be beamed into your house.
And that's the whole thing, right? I mean, that is the crack through of the content saturation is finding out a way to reach the viewer. I mean, there are times when people they don't know about a certain outlet or whatnot, and you crack through and like, wow, I really like this. Well, it took we've been here, but you're trying to crack an information bubble.
Yeah.
And I am not saying, as a journalist, I'm no exception, and everybody has their own information bubble through right or wrong that they have curated
Absolutely
for themselves,
true.
Right? But that is tough when you're on this side of it to kind of, if you're trying to crack through that bubble, that's a difficult task.
That's
a difficult task, whether it's TV or print.
Yep, it really is. And there is now nationwide a lot of doubt in institutions. People don't necessarily believe media. They don't necessarily believe government. And they don't necessarily believe in lots of public education, something as basic as getting immunizations. There's a lot of doubt in a lot of things, and it's affected the journalism world too. I will tell you this: I had an owner of the Portland Tribune, and he was the president of the company, who once told me, "You never ever have to print fake news. If somebody says, I believe that the measles shots will make you a Martian, you don't got to print that." So I was at one of those papers that I was getting no pressure to write fake science.
Yeah.
And that was really great. I mean, it was wonderful to know that I could always say, a person would call in and say, you have to understand the President of the United States is from Mars. I could say to them, well, he's not, and I'm never going to print what you just wrote.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have a nice day.
Yeah. Hey, have a nice day, and let's move on. Yeah. I think that's great. The journalism industry is definitely in an interesting spot, as a whole, as we talked about the saturation side and whatnot. But you still remain, and I want to go back to the word you used, hopeful.
Yep.
It sounds like, and the reason for that is what?
There are young talents who want to do this. If we advertise a job, we would get tremendous 20-year-olds and 20-something-year-olds who would want to be a storyteller or want to be a watchdog, who are well-trained coming out of U of O or any other school. U of O's got a tremendous program, but any other program.
Happy alum.
And Hey, okay. There you go. I just think that there are so many good people who really want to do this and who are excited about doing it. So they make me hopeful that we are going to figure out the mechanism by which it happens.
Yeah.
I'm going to repeat myself. We're always going to have watchdogs, and we're always going to have storytellers. And when I was in the process of hiring, it was really fun to see people whose skill sets I wish I had had at 20.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think about that. I was actually, speaking of the U of O, I was just down there, oh, man, maybe a month and a half ago. This is how I learned I am in my mid-30s. I don't consider myself old. But I had this moment where, like, maybe age is befalling me some because we have a producer that we have recently hired here on our morning show, and she does an awesome, awesome job, who was taught by somebody I graduated with from the University of Oregon Journalism School. So I went down there. He asked me if I could come down and do some demo tape reviews. So, in the TV side versus maybe the print side, on the print or the writing side, typically, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's a resume and a portfolio of work, right? A portfolio of writing samples and things like that. On the TV side, it's a demo tape.
Yeah.
It's like a quick little sizzle reel that shows, what you can do on camera, some of your stories. And it's not a perfect science, but your idea is you got to grab a news director's attention, and try to get that interview and try to get that phone call. So we were doing some of these tape reviews and that was great. But the reason I thought about this is I am in the room with seniors and juniors and sophomores, mostly seniors. And some of these demo tapes, I'm like, get out of here. You're so good. And you're just light years beyond where I was when I graduated college. I mean, truly, and this isn't me dogging the U of O. I got great experience down there. But for me, most of my experience was learned on the job, which will be the case for anybody in the industry. That's not. But I saw some of the talent. I was like, man, some of those students right now they're light years ahead. And they're not. They're 20, 21, 22.
Yeah.
I'm excited for the future with that in mind as well.
I will tell you that I worked with a young woman named Hannah at the Portland Tribune who I would write my stories and then log off and go make food for my wife. She would write her stories, and then I would find them as reels on Instagram. And we had music in there and voiceovers and she had a skill set that I will never, ever match.
Well, and it's part of the equation, too, and it's one thing, like, I am not an expert. I mean, I love where I'm at in my career, and that's great. But doing some of these demo tape reels and reviews, I am the age of millennial that grew up pre-internet, and then internet came, like, the cell phone phase came in later. I was in high school, but like.
Sure.
I had the pre-internet phase, right? And it's not an excuse to not be like adept at Instagram. I feel like I'm just fine.
Yeah.
But you see some of these reels that some of these people have put together, and they're social media forward. And like, yeah, that's where it's at. And I'm still learning that, right?
Yeah.
So it's just a fascinating conversation. Okay, we got to take a quick break, and then I want to dive into a few things on the other side of this break. I want to talk about some of the work you've done as a journalist, including some of those just awesome moments, right? When you leave, whether it's an article or in my case a show, where you just leave going like, yeah. This was a great moment. I want to pick your brain about that and talk about what it's been like to have this marriage between journalism and novel writing, two very different avenues. So I want to talk about both of those things here coming up on the other side of this break. So please stay with us. This is part two with Dana Haynes just after this. Welcome back to KOIN Conversations as we continue to have this conversation with Dana Haynes. This is part two of this interview with Dana. If you missed the first part, that part is about his work as a novelist and in the process of turning a notepad into a book into a movie. And we're going to dive a little bit into his work as a novelist here a little bit because he has intertwined that career with a career as a journalist. Dana, you don't stop writing. I don't know how. And I want to start there. I want to talk about this marriage that you have between your work as a journalist and writing as a novelist, because I think about, I'll take my career. And I thoroughly enjoy writing. I love it. But there are absolutely moments where I'm like, I need a break. For me, whenever the feeling that I try to fight is, I need to mix something up if I'm writing something and it feels like a book report. I don't want that feeling of like, ugh. Well, how do you do this life as a journalist where you write and you copy edit and then write for fun on purpose off to the side?
Let me start by saying in the world of mystery writers, there are two distinct camps. Those of us who came out of journalism, which is not a big group, and those who never were in journalism. The first group never, ever, ever misses a deadline. The second group complains incessantly about deadlines, right? The first group are really easy to edit. If my editor came to me and said, I was thinking about your protagonist. I think he'd be good as a penguin. I'd be like, I can do him as a penguin.
Sure.
Yeah,
Why not?
Yeah, I'm getting paid because
Uh-huh.
we have pretty thick skins. And the other side, the writers have pretty thin skins. Like, how dare they change my golden words? How dare they?
Yes.
And journalists are like, whatever, man.
Yeah. Oh, I just needed to. I have a deadline.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
send it.
Yeah.
But what
Yeah.
about just the time management? Like, to do that, from, I don't know if it's actually 9 to 5, but colloquially, I'll say from 9 to 5, and then to go home on the weekends, you're writing a novel.
Yeah, I often write, when I was working, I would often write a chapter or two longhand in the morning, then go do my journalism job. Then in the evening, I would translate it into my MacBook. And the reason that worked for me so well is I was using my creative side of my brain in the morning, and then I was using my analytical side of my brain in the afternoon or in the evening. And one of two things would happen. I'd read it and think, oh, okay, that worked. That's pretty good. Or, oh, it was terrible. I was clearly on crack this morning. It's horrible. And so that I was able to edit on a daily basis what if it was good or not good, which makes me really fast. I'm a very fast novelist. I can write a book in 90 days.
Seriously?
Yeah, I am.
From not even having a concept to...
From not having a concept to handing it in, I can do it in 90 days. And that makes me much faster than most novelists.
Does that put you up there with like Stephen King? Like,
Yeah,
what is that?
no, I'm probably that guy's inhuman. Yeah, he had 2 books published this morning while I was shaving. He's nuts, man. But I am remarkably fast, and it's because of you coming out of journalism. The joke we have too is that we don't have writer's block in journalism. They call it unemployment.
I actually haven't heard
Yeah,
that.
if you go to the school board meeting and come back and tell your editor the muse is not with me today, they would replace you with a 20-year-old in a heartbeat.
Somebody else will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the muse is visiting somebody, dude. Yeah,
That's hysterical.
Yeah, you never ever can't write. And sometimes you'll write something and the next morning you'll look at your story and think, oh man, I really nailed that one. And that story is just cookie cutter, fill in the dot.
Yeah.
And every now and then you'll write a story and you'll pick it up and read it and think, okay, I brought that essence to that story that nobody else would have written it just like I wrote it.
I think there are so many parallels between writing, and I know our avenues of TV news writing is very different than print writing.
Sure.
You're reading or you're writing very much for the ear, right? Whether it's the use of sound or the big thing is writing conversationally. Like trying to use words that I'm using right now. This is a conversation and not sounding so, newsman-y, right?
Absolutely.
Like that's my big thing is to be conversational with your writing. But even with that said, I think what baffles me the most, as much as I love my job, I go home and the thought of writing a book sounds like homework. And like to you, that's just joy.
Yeah.
And I guess what is the genesis of that? That's the feeling I'm trying to find, because for me it's I got to do something else. I don't know. But it's not continuing to write after I've been doing it all day.
Yeah, the structure of news is so stilted in newspaper writing. It's different on television, but it's so by the book. You have a lead, and then you have the next most important, and the next most important. Then you have a quote, and you have it's very formulaic. And then you go home, and you're God. You can have a character who's blonde, and you suddenly decide that he's not blonde. He's
You're
a
in
redhead.
charge.
It's my character. I get to decide that, and it's more of a free flow. You can open up the taps and just do what you want. And so it's such a different beast. The other great part, I mean, I get invigorated when I write, but I got invigorated writing journalism too. And I know that you experienced this. There are some stories I would go out and it was a very hard-hitting news story, and I knew exactly what I was going to do. Other times I would go out with a photographer like a Jaime Valdez or a Jonathan House, and they cut down a giant elm behind the Portland Art Museum, and I went to cover it. And I went with a guy named Jaime Valdez, and I stood back and said, tell me the story. And I watched the entire thing through his eyes. I could never have written the story I wrote if I didn't see it through Jaime's lens first. And he figured out what was interesting. During the pandemic, John and I went out to what we called the pandemic rodeo. They set up at Portland Airport in parking lot, the red parking lot, a gigantic inoculation center with thousands of volunteers who were inoculating against COVID, thousands of people an hour. And there was a drive-through process, and it looked like the most amazing thing in the world. In that case, Jonathan House was the photographer. And I said, John, show me what's interesting. I want to see this through your eyes. And it ended up being one of those stories that I'm incredibly proud of, but there's no way I would have written it if I didn't have that. For you, it's a cinematographer, and for you, it's an audio editing.
Sure.
And for me, it was like every now and then, I could sit back and let them guide me and have them tell me, because it's going to be a visual story. And that was just always so exhilarating.
I can't begin to express how much I value working with a photographer and or an editor that you trust. I don't even know how to begin to put that into words, where you're not just worried about a technical glitch and something, the audio is not whatever. But when you know somebody's going to get the shot that looks good, right? And because that is part of the story. And this, as you were talking, it made me think of one of the best pieces of advice that I actually got from the University of Oregon. We were talking about the journalism school there, and it was an adjunct professor. I cannot remember his name. And he told me one piece of advice to a very small, it was an interview class. It was an interview-specific class. It was all about that. And you talking about, hey, I want to see this through somebody. Like, you didn't come in with this perfect idea of what it was going to be, right? And I think the best piece of advice I got specifically for an interview, but I've kind of applied it, I've loosened it up a little bit, is just listen. And I know that sounds so obvious, but so... I did this early in my career too, where even despite hearing the advice, where I have notes here. I have notes for this conversation with Dana. Of course, I'm prepared. I'm planned. There are questions that I have asked you today that are on this paper, and there are questions that are not. And I think that's the point, is come in prepared, but listen to what somebody is saying. Same thing with going to a story shoot. Yeah, you probably have a general idea of what this story could be, but listen. Where does it take you? Don't come in ready to ask your bullet points. Now, there are deadlines, and sometimes that's all you can do if you have a day turn. But if you have a feature story, listen. And that was one of my favorite pieces of advice.
It's great advice.
It's so simple. Yeah. Doesn't it sound obvious?
Yeah, it is. The other one is end every interview with asking, what did I not ask you that I should have? I sometimes will have another half of the interview will follow that question, because they'll say, well, since you asked.
There's something to say. I did that at the end of part one with this conversation. I said I turned to you, and it just worked and I learned that early on too through a reporter I worked with in my first market in Eugene, and same thing where it's like, wow, that's brilliant, because there's just like this catch-all, right? Then you also feel as a reporter that you are telling the full story. You didn't miss something with that. I know we're running out of time once again. And Dana, maybe one of these days we just do these conversations over a round table with a beer in our hand, because we could talk about this stuff for hours. But I am curious to know just a moment for you, a moment in your journalism career where you're just like, there's a reason we do this job, right? It just leaves you fulfilled or exhilarated. What is that moment? Or choose a moment for you. I'm sure there's more than one.
Yeah, it is. I was working with the West Lynn Tidings, tiny little newspaper, and Clackamas Community College was going to open a new facility.
What year are we talking here?
Oh my God, this was early '90s.
Okay.
And they were going to. They said the guy for whom it's being named is going to come. He's going to be on campus. His name is Linus Pauling. And I stopped her and I said, "I'm sorry, Linus Pauling is going to be on your campus?" And she said, "You know him?" I said, "The guy won 2 Nobel Prizes in chemistry and peace, and darn near won a third. He almost beat Watson and Crick to find the double helix of DNA.
Gosh, okay.
He was weeks behind them. This guy's won 2 Nobel Prizes. Yes, I'm going to come up and meet him." So I got to meet him. He was 145 years old. He was about 2 feet tall, just a tiny little guy. And I got to talk to one of the most brilliant minds of the 20th century. And one of the things I asked him is, I said, why did you want to come to Oregon City to this community college? And he said, "Oh, I grew up in Clackamas County, and I won an award as a wet hand milk cow milker at the county fair." Now, I've read everything you can read about the great Linus Pauling. I've read every book about this dude, but nobody ever told me that he grew up on a farm in Clackamas County. So I got to write a story. 1,000 writers have written about Linus Pauling. I'm the only guy who ever wrote about that.
Unbelievable.
Yeah,
that's super. I love that.
Yeah,
I love that. Man, on my end, I mean, there are definitely moments that stick out where they are just because they are moments in time that you can't get back, and Yeah, I was fortunate enough in my first market. I covered the this is kind of niche, but I have a background in sports as well. Covered the University of Oregon Men's National Championship in golf. That was in Eugene. Casey Martin, Tiger Woods' teammate
Sure.
at Stanford back in the 90s, and so that was a really cool moment. That was when I am a golf guy, and that was one where, because I've just been a fan for so long. This is almost 10 years ago now. But, just developed a rapport so quickly over the course of like a week where, guys like Casey Martin and the players, like they're looking to me to kind of like lead the charge on some of these interviews. And I just I really valued that experience. 2018 on the sports side, Oregon State winning college championship in Omaha. I was there for that.
Oh my gosh.
And that was really fun. So that's definitely a moment in time. But I will say the moments that later like really filled my cup that I still just cherish are a lot of the shows that like you and I have worked on together, those specials, those town halls here at KOIN, where a lot of this is when I put the producer hat on. I know I've done a decent chunk of work here as an anchor, but as a producer, when you put together these shows and you've made a difference, you have done the two big things. And this is another piece of advice that this person doesn't even know they gave me. When I was in high school and in my freshman year of college, I interned for John Canzano over at the Bald-Faced Truth. At the time it was in the Pac West Center, and I would drive up once a week from Eugene to just intern the show. Would intern, and every once in a while, John Strong, this is before the Timbers went MLS, he had his Timbers show, and he would ask if I could stay late. This is before John Strong became John Strong, the voice of American soccer. And John Canzano said something on one of his shows during his show to the public that stuck with me forever. Is like, my job is to entertain and to educate. And I was like, wow, this is a light bulb moment that I've taken with me, and I've applied it to the town halls, the political specials that you and I have worked on together, Dana, where we have to educate people. And that doesn't mean that you're necessarily, maybe you are teaching somebody something that they don't know, but also breaking it down in a digestible way, or maybe thinking about something differently. But this is a show. It has to be entertaining. And when those two things come together, where we have done this political special where we talk about everything that's on the ballot, maybe the sneaky things that are on the ballot, and you just the product is there and the entertainment value is there. I have left some of those political specials that we've done, or some of the town halls, and just thought that is why local news on the TV exists.
Can I add an E?
Yeah.
Educate, entertain, and empower. People will take the news, the information from your show, or the shows that I participated in, and it gives them the power to figure out, that's how I want to vote on this thing. That's how I don't want to vote on this thing.
Sure.
So empowering a person to take more of their life into their own hands. If I'm going to make this vote, it's going to affect my kids, my house, my commute, my tax dollar. But now I know about it because KOIN.
Yeah. It's a great feeling. So fulfilled. Dana, I could talk about this forever. Thank you for being my first KOIN conversation here, part 1 and part 2. It's just been an absolute blast.
It's great. Thanks for doing this.
Super fun.
All right.